So first, let's back up about 4.5 years to the summer of 2021. The NCAA adopted an interim policy at the time, allowing student athletes for the first time to earn compensation from their name, image, and likeness. Previously, student athletes couldn't receive any form of compensation for things like jersey sales, autographs, endorsements, speaking engagements. And NIL compensation, you're correct, it flows primarily through independent third-party channels, these collectives, these businesses, rather than the university athletic departments themselves. The schools aren't party to the contract, and that's an important thing to be able to differentiate, though sometimes they're involved in compliance because NCAA rules generally, they want to make sure that these players are compliant, that what they're receiving in terms of benefits are permissible. That's where the schools come in. Interestingly, the athletic director from Ohio State, Ross Bork, recently just said that now the schools are kind of acting as this intermediary where they're allowing the businesses, whether they're corporate, whether they're local, to kind of act as a third party and to bring these opportunities to their student athletes and say, we're going to work almost as a marketing agency for you to be able to get you the opportunities to make money through NIL, whether it's social media, whether it's paid endorsements, whether it's merchandise. That's really the new role that they're playing. But you are correct right off the bat that these schools aren't the ones that are cutting the checks. Now, that's separate, by the way, from the revenue sharing that you mentioned. The House versus NCAA settlement that took effect last summer is now allowing schools to dish out $20.5 million per year to all their student athletes, not just for college football, not just for men's basketball, but across all of those sports. And that figure is likely to increase into, probably the mid 30s in terms of millions of dollars being spent by 2036. That's the projection. But very quickly, all these schools are pushing back, and for right reason. Like LSU saying to themselves, it costs us $7 million to get the right quarterback in here. $20.5 million is cute. That is not enough money for us to be able to do business. So even though there's some changes being made, and the optics, at least when they're first rolled out, is that this is going to be good for student athletes, it's going to be good for the universities, they're just not up to snuff as it relates to the cost these schools and these collectives are burdening on an annual basis.
Yeah, and I want to actually drill down on that because I think we have one of the tailor-made test cases here. Obviously, just in the last couple of days has come to a bit of a resolution. But that's with the Darian Mensah story going on with Duke or Miami, I guess we should say now. Mm-hmm. Can you kind of walk us through, because I think that's a really good test case and kind of what the broad new frontiers of this policy area is, and kind of what are the long runs effect of that case specifically, and what kind of, case law do we now have on the books that we didn't last week?
So what's interesting, there's three separate issues at hand here. There's the contracts, there's the quote-unquote case law, and then there's the optics as it relates to the schools, the collectives, and the players. So let's start with Mensah. 2 years ago, he plays for Tulane. They have a great year. They make it to the American Athletic Association or Conference's championship game against Army. They lose that game. He goes ahead and enters the portal. Duke, surprisingly, opens up, their wallet, and they pay top dollar to get one of the best quarterbacks on the market. He comes to Duke, and they win an ACC championship kind of out of nowhere, a real Cinderella story for them. Now, Duke rightfully, right from the get-go, what they wanted to do was they said to themselves, this is a player that we could never have had 10 years ago. We didn't recruit him out of high school, so we missed on a player that flew under the radar. And in the old system, he would never have transferred to a school like Duke just for an opportunity to have a bigger profile and potentially get to the NFL. But because we overpaid for him last year, now we have him on the books. We want to give him a multi-year contract. And the contract that he had in terms of his NIL inducement was for multiple years. The problem is that there is no language that has been upheld on a state level, and certainly not on a federal level, that says that that contract is binding for multiple years. All they've really done is be able to lure him to the school with the offer, financially on an annual basis, year by year. And once the portal closes and he's on that roster and he's enrolled at that school, they have him for that year. That's all that was guaranteed. Now, what they're saying is that you signed a contract and you said that you were going to, do endorsements, have social media posts, whatever was contained in that contract. But really, they were just paying him. It was an end around. It's a pay-for-play situation. They're paying him to be on that Duke roster. Now, as soon as the portal opens back up, he then goes ahead and says, I want to enter. And this contract then ends up being, the bugaboo. It's the issue. Can they go ahead and enforce that contract? Can they say that you are not allowed to transfer to another school? I mean, from a legal perspective, you can't stop him from transferring to another school if he's academically eligible. And in terms of a clawback, I think contractually, that's where Duke was in a very good position. They could end up making the argument that you were tethered to Duke, you were tethered to being a part of this community, and your value as a spokesperson is as a Duke quarterback. In the end, what's happened, it hasn't been fully reported yet, but this is a buyout situation where Miami comes in and there's money exchange for Duke to drop the suit, to basically say that we're not going to contest him transferring, and we are not out that money, which we should have been owed in the second year of him being a part of this team. You saw it more directly, by the way, with Ole Miss and LSU recently. Defensive ends left Ole Miss, went to LSU, and LSU directly paid back to the institution because there was a revenue share issue. They paid back about $550,000 to Ole Miss, saying, you essentially were going to pay him to play in the next season. So we're going to go ahead and fill back up your coffers in that case. That's where this is headed. And the last piece of this, by the way, is the optics of it. So if I'm a student athlete and I'm on the open market, it stands to reason that I'm going to take the highest financial offer. But if a school is continually fighting with players over the fulfillment of that contract, it could say that you need to make 10 social media posts. You make 9. You may be all conference player, but all of a sudden you didn't live up to the contract. Now we're going to try to claw back money. That's going to hurt them in recruiting. And for the most part, these car dealerships, these local businesses, they're not getting $2 million worth of value out of a player. What they're really getting from a value perspective is people in the community knowing that they're a heavy donor, they're a part of the institution, as it relates to football in this case. And that's why people want to buy their Dodge, their Wrangler, their Ford, whatever, from that car dealership, not because a defensive lineman or a safety or a wide receiver said, go ahead and shop here. We have the, 0 money down, 60-month, all that other stuff. So the reality is you're not going to go ahead and fight these kids tooth and nail on every element of the contract. And I think in the end, Duke ends up looking, a little bit embarrassed in the fact that they thought that they could block him, and then at the 11th hour to turn around and say, all right, we'll take the money. I think that hurts them long terms in their recruiting.
So you've hit on a bunch of things I want to unpack, because I think, there's 5 or 6 elements there that demonstrate that the system, the way it is currently designed, creates these problems. And so, if somebody works, somebody's in the NFL and it's just a direct labor contract. It's you're going to play football for the Dallas Cowboys for 3 years. And so here's how much money we're going to pay you to show up to practice, show up on the field and perform. It's just a straight labor contract, right? The NIL deals are not that. It's this stuff where it's like, you're going to post on social media, or we're going to put your picture on a billboard. I mean, you're essentially licensing yourself for this company or the university to use in such a way so that they can get attention for their cars or sell tickets or whatever. If you fulfill the obligations of that contract, if you do your 10 posts, or you do your, like throughout the year, you do your 10 social media posts and they take your picture and they put it on a billboard, and you've fulfilled the terms of your contract, what possible leverage would the school have to prevent you from leaving? Even if you agreed to do that for 3 years, right? You said, okay, I'm going to do this over a period of time. If you've done the social media posts for that year that you said you were going to do, how would they have any legal or contractual leverage over you to then force you to stay at a university? I mean, so that's one question. The second question I have is I don't even know how you can force anybody to, what if you want to change majors? What if you decide, I don't want to be in engineering and I want to do, architecture or something, and now Miami has a better architectural school? How could your obligations to do social media posts for the football teams, give them leverage for you to prevent you from going to an entirely different school that may be better for your career and your education?
I mean, let's start with the fact. Ray Kroc, the founder of McDonald's, said it best. Contracts are like hearts. They're made to be broken. And everybody has their right to take it to court. And continually, any collective that is trying to enforce that this is a labor contract, they're losing. I think they already know they're losing in the first place. I think it's just about kind of bullying some of these players and these wannabe agents. This is one of the other issues in this environment, is that agents are not certified by the NCAA. The NFL, the NBA, the NHL, they're all certified. They all go through a process. They're all capped at how much money they can make. In most professional leagues in the US, it's 3%. Some of these guys are taking 20, 25, 30% of the earnings from these players. So they're getting robbed. And in a lot of cases, they don't understand exactly, the legal precedent behind them or the fact that they're going to win in court. All they want is to say to their client, their players, yes, if you want to transfer, you can go and I'll get you a bag. I'll get you as much money as possible at this new school. The collectives and the schools on the other side, they're using it kind of as, a tactic to be able to show that they're serious, to be able to throw some legal heft behind it. But at the end of the day, all that Duke could really hope for and their collective in this, case was to get their money back for the year that he didn't fulfill those obligations. And to be honest, Mensah, as I said, he left Tulane. So it wasn't as though Duke is, this victim in this situation. They benefited from him being there. They paid him for his services. He overperformed. His market value was higher. And because of that, Miami was happy to come in and pay top dollar for him. But also they were able to offer something on the field that Duke cannot offer, which is they have a roster that's built, in Mario Cristobal's image, which is it's a championship caliber roster. They just played, they were, one possession away from winning the national championship. That's also enticing to a player like Mensah. I think this gets lost a little bit in the dollars and cents. Yes, it's incredible some of the money they can make, and you can have a multi-million-dollar jump from one season to the next. But some of these kids still very much want to win. So Duke was never in a position to be able to retain him.
Yeah, and I want to ask, because I think the Mensah story is very instructive, and I appreciate you unpacking that all for us. But before we zoom out, I kind of want to focus on this athlete/institution or team relationship. Is there then, because the incentives right now, I think the incentives now were not maybe what some of the I would say early movers in NIL really thought they were getting into, right? I don't think that we're seeing, I'm even beyond just, the value of demonstrating oneself as a donor and supporting the community and the local sports team in that. Because I think that with this transitory nature, there's no permanence within that representation of the product. And that being said, is there anything or any sort of leverage that the institution itself could use in order to lock in, we'll say multiple, even to say 2 sequential years, without the risk of that being invalidated simply on the fact of not barring the kid from going to a different school? Because, don't get me wrong, I think everybody should be able to apply, to be able to apply their trade at where they're able to get top dollar, which I was going to say, this is like hyper professionalism. We used to talk about amateurism 10 years ago. This is hyper professionalism at this point. But is there any sort of mechanism whereby we can actually get some sort of quasi state of permanence here?
Yes, and I think it comes from fixing the transfer portal and the rules around eligibility when you do transfer. For generations, there was what was called a year in academic residency. So if you transferred, you had to establish yourself as a member of that community, that institution, take classes, maintain a certain grade point average, and then you were eligible. So you had to essentially sit for 1 year before you could play. If that was brought back today, a lot of these players would say to themselves, maybe I need to take a 25% haircut on what my market value would be, but I don't want to risk spending an entire year sitting on the sideline being forgotten about when I could be on campus playing, and increasing my overall value and keeping that continuity. Because at this point, as we said off the top, unlike professional sports, every single player is a potential free agent every single year, and that's unsustainable. It is skyrocketed cost to maintain rosters. It's also created this situation where there is no loyalty. And honestly, from a player's perspective, you'd be doing yourself a disservice for not at least kicking the tires and going out and seeing if there was market interest. So if you go ahead and you limit it to one transfer for free in the current rule base where you can immediately have eligibility, that's fine. Let's do a 5-year eligibility clock window, one free transfer. Any transfer beyond that, have it go back to the old rules. And really, that's where these institutions need to band together. The NCAA has been feckless. They've lacked leadership. They've continually gotten beaten in court to the point where they're not even challenging players transferring in. They're not even challenging professional players coming from the Chinese Basketball Association playing in the Big Ten because they're so afraid to lose and have punitive damages against them and their member institutions. So what it really means is that these schools need to band together from an academic perspective and say that we are not going to deem these players, student athletes, ineligible unless they at least pass one course in a semester. Like, have some kind of mechanism to say that for you to be a student athlete at our school, you are not 100% immediately eligible. That's just one hypothetical of a remedy. But in most cases, you're going to need a new entity, a new governing body, or a complete overhaul to the current NCAA to be able to give it teeth again, to have an enforcement arm, to really be able to go through and have clear rules that everyone can play by. Because we can all dislike it, whether it's Baylor letting James Najee come in, a player who is, in the NBA G League for years. Now all of a sudden he's back at the college level. You're seeing it with Bediako at Alabama as well, someone coming in and being deemed eligible once again. The only way these things are going to stop is if there is a governing body, because if every single school is just acting in their own best interest, they're trying to build the best roster possible to compete for championships. And you really can't stop that competitive nature from a coaching, athletic department, or school president perspective.
Hey, LeBron still has 4 years of eligibility. Maybe he can come back. he doesn't even need the money.
He was all-state in football, too, in Ohio. I think he looked pretty good in the
He can play receiver.
Ohio State from a tight end.
The pushback on the waiting the year out has always been, well, coaches don't have to wait a year out. I mean, and coaches have real, honest-to-goodness labor contracts, and they break them all the time with buyouts, and they don't have to sit out a year. And so I think if you're going to go back to that, because I think a lot of people agree with that will create a situation where more kids will stay at the school instead of sitting out a year. You're always going to get that pushback. Well, it's not fair because coaches don't have to sit out a year when they go to a different school.
I think for years that was an absolutely fair criticism of the market, particularly when they couldn't make money. But public sentiment, I think, has shifted, where now you're talking about, poor me, I'm only making $800,000. I can make $1.4 million if I transferred. I don't think it's the same sob story that it once was. And by the way, since all these rules are made up, like the NCAA and the schools that get together, they're making things, out of thin air.
Right.
You may as well put in a provision if your school, goes ahead and terminates a coach, or if a coach leaves, it opens up a free eligibility window. I think that's a way to meet people in the middle. You saw it at Iowa State, where Matt Campbell leaves, he goes to Penn State, a mass exodus of players, many following him to Penn State. It happened and left them, with a French Prince of Bel-Air meme, where all of a sudden you're looking around in the locker room, where is everybody? That's going to happen. And I think it's fair to be able to give the same, player movement to the student athletes if their coach leaves.